Chapter 16. 3 weeks later, Scarlett was sitting in the living room. She was dressed all in black again because she was in mourning for Frank. Inside, Scarlett felt terrible. She hadn't loved Frank, but he had been kind to her, and now he was gone. Scarlett made sure no one was watching her before going to the liquor cabinet and taking a drink of liquor. Since that terrible day at Tara, when she had discovered Ellen was dead, Scarlett had been drinking liquor, but it was very important not to let anyone see her doing it. Ladies did not drink alcohol. But Scarlett felt that sometimes she needed a drink to get her through the long days of working. And now that Frank was dead, she had been taking small drinks every day. She would spray herself with perfume after she was done so that no one could tell. Scarlett heard the doorbell ring. Quickly, she sprayed herself with cologne and washed her mouth out with water so that the guest would not smell alcohol. In a moment, Mammy came up the stairs, saying, "Miss Scarlett, it's that Rhett Butler here to see you. I told him you weren't feeling well, but he said he would wait." Like almost everyone in Atlanta, Mammy did not think Rhett was a respectable man, and she wanted Scarlett to stay away from him. "Tell him I'll be down in a minute, Mammy," said Scarlett. Quickly, she sprayed even more perfume on and washed her mouth out. When she arrived in the living room, Rhett was sitting comfortably in a chair.
"Hello, Scarlett,"
he said cheerfully.
"I wanted to see how you were doing. This is the second time I've seen you in that mourning clothing. You just can't seem to keep your husbands alive, can you?"
"Oh, shut up, Rhett. How can you tease me when I feel so terrible?" Scarlett cried and burst into tears. She did feel terrible. Scarlett was feeling guilty, for she believed that she had caused Frank's death. She wasn't sorry about owning a factory and driving around town by herself. But why did Frank have to get himself into a group like the Ku Klux Klan? He wasn't strong enough or smart enough. Truthfully, Scarlett was thinking that if she had never married Frank, none of this would have happened. Sue Ellen would have married him, and Frank would have had the nice, sweet, boring little wife he had always wanted.
"What's the matter, Scarlett?"
Rhett asked, taking her hand. "Oh, Rhett, I think God is punishing me. If I hadn't stolen Frank from Sue Ellen, none of this would have happened. She was supposed to marry him, and I went and married him for his money. And now he's dead. It's probably all my fault. Oh, dear, I'm going to go to hell after I die for this." And Scarlett began to cry harder. Rhett smiled.
"Now, Scarlett, let's try to think about this. You are like a criminal who is not sorry he committed the crime, but is terribly sorry he's going to prison. Now, answer me honestly, Scarlett. Are you really sorry you stole Frank from Sue Ellen?"
"Well, no. I'm not sorry. I did what I had to do," said Scarlett, wiping her eyes.
"Yes, I know that is what you think. It's too bad everyone in Atlanta disagrees with you,"
said Rhett, smiling. Except for Melanie and Ashley, Scarlett really had no friends in Atlanta. Everyone thought she was terrible, first for marrying her sister's man, and then owning a factory. She did not seem like a lady to them. Oh, I don't care about what those nasty old women think. I did what I had to do to help Tara survive. They don't know that the Old South is gone, and people have to change their old ways, said Scarlett angrily.
Good for you, Scarlett. That's the kind of talk I like to hear from you. Now really, if you had to do it all over again, would you do anything differently?
Well, I suppose not. I am sorry Frank's dead, though. Really, I am. Why did he have to join that group?
I suppose Frank thought he had to do something to fight the Northerners and their new laws. Scarlett, you didn't make him join the Ku Klux Klan. That was his decision, and unfortunately it got him killed. Now, almost everyone you know is saying that you made him go out that night to get revenge on that black man. Everyone believes it's your fault he's dead. Everyone except Melanie, you know. She's very loyal to you. But that doesn't matter, Scarlett, so long as you know the truth,
said Rhett calmly. Scarlett was beginning to feel better. You're right, Rhett. It is nice to talk to you, when you're not being horrible, that is. You're very smart about these things, she said, smiling sweetly at him. Rhett laughed.
Well, that's not the nicest thing a woman has said to me, but I suppose I'm grateful. Now, Scarlett, let's talk about something else. You didn't ask me why I came here.
Why are you here? Asked Scarlett.
Well, Scarlett, I am very surprised at myself. You see, I told myself I would never marry any woman, but here I am.
What are you talking about, Rhett? Asked Scarlett, a little annoyed.
Well, Scarlett, I came here to ask you to marry me.
Scarlett stared at him in shock for so long that Rhett laughed.
Well, Mrs. Kennedy, I don't suppose I can spend all my life waiting to catch you between husbands. Who knows who you'll decide to marry next? I decided that I'd better be the next husband, so I can keep you out of trouble,
said Rhett. But there was something else in his eyes, a strange look of emotion that Scarlett had never seen before and did not understand. But, Rhett, this is crazy. Besides, I'm finished with marriage. I'll never marry again, said Scarlett.
But, Scarlett, think of whom you have married, a boy and an old man. Perhaps you should try spending time with someone a little closer to your own age. Besides, have you ever thought of marrying just for fun?
Marrying for fun? Oh, don't be ridiculous, Rhett. Marriage isn't for fun, at least not for the wives. I think the husbands have more fun than anyone else, said Scarlett. Rhett laughed.
I suppose you're right. But nevertheless, I'm asking you to marry me, Scarlett. I think we could have a very good time together.
But you don't love me, and I don't love you, Rhett, said Scarlett. The strange look appeared in Rhett's eyes again. I wonder if he really is in love with me, thought Scarlett. No, that's impossible. He just likes talking to me.
Well, Scarlett, maybe I don't love you, but I think we could have a very good life together. You and I are alike, you know. We can look life in the eyes and do what we have to do. We're both strong and we're both selfish. We don't give a damn about anyone but ourselves. Don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about, Scarlett. I think you should consider it,
said Rhett seriously. But, Rhett, I don't love you. I still love...
Don't say it.
Rhett suddenly grabbed Scarlett and pulled her close to him.
I don't want to hear any more about your stupid Frank or your stupid Ashley Wilkes. You need someone like me, someone who understands you the way that others never have. Say you'll marry me. Say yes. Say yes.
Scarlett whispered, "I think I'm going to faint." She had never seen Rhett like this before. She remembered the night she had escaped Atlanta during the war, when Rhett had last kissed her. Her body felt hot all over.
Say yes.
And Rhett kissed her. "Yes," Scarlett whispered.
You're sure? You don't want to change your mind?
Rhett asked. He let go of her. "No, I'm sure. I'll marry you, Rhett. I suppose it would be nice," said Scarlett softly.
Good then,
said Rhett.
We'll be married in New Orleans and spend our honeymoon there, if you like.
"Oh, Rhett, I'd love to go to New Orleans," Scarlett cried. "I've never been there. It must be so fancy. I'll come back to Atlanta with the best clothes, and everyone will be so jealous." Rhett smiled at her delight.
Whatever you like, my dear.
Chapter 17. Scarlett and Rhett were married several days later. Frank Kennedy had not even been dead for 1 month. Everyone in Atlanta was amazed and shocked. Aunt Pitty Pat's friends went to her house and gave her angry lectures. "Pitty Pat, how could you let that girl do all these things?" they said sternly. Pitty Pat cried and worried and said, "But, my dears, it's Scarlett. She's so stubborn. What could I do to stop her?" From the moment she had first arrived in Atlanta in 1862, Scarlett had done some crazy things. She had danced and gone to parties when she was supposed to be in mourning for Charles Hamilton, her first husband. That was bad enough. But then, after the war was over, she had come back to Atlanta and opened a factory. Women weren't supposed to do things like that. Scarlett was a good businesswoman, and her factory had many customers. Women were not supposed to be good at business. She had married her sister's man, Frank Kennedy. No one in Atlanta really understood the reason why Scarlett had done this, but they all thought it was terrible. Poor Sue Ellen! But the worst things that people whispered about Scarlett had to do with Ashley Wilkes. There were some people who knew about her feelings for him, and they wondered what she might do next. Ashley's sister, India Wilkes, had hated Scarlett since they were teenagers, and she knew about Scarlett's feelings for Ashley. "If she tries to hurt Melanie, I'll kill her. I'll make sure she never steps into Atlanta again," India would think to herself angrily. But now, the ladies of Atlanta really did not know what to think. Rhett Butler was the most talked-about man in Atlanta, and Scarlett was the most talked-about woman. And now they were married. Mrs. Merriweather and Mrs. Elsing, two of the most respected women in society, talked about nothing else. Who knew what Rhett and Scarlett were going to do next? Rhett and Scarlett spent 1 month in New Orleans. Scarlett had never been outside of Georgia, and she was excited and amazed by the elegant old city in Louisiana. It was so different from Atlanta. The buildings were much older and more beautiful. The people were different as well. Everyone enjoyed themselves more, eating and drinking until late into the night. It was nice to be around people who wanted to have fun, dance, and go to parties. Everyone in Atlanta was so boring and serious. Scarlett could not stop eating the delicious seafood and drinking the wonderful champagne. "Rhett, I'm going to get as fat as a pig eating all this food," said Scarlett while eating a dish of seafood one evening. "And I almost don't care." Rhett laughed at her excitement.
"Go ahead and eat, Mrs. Butler. If you become too large, I suppose I can trade you in for another wife. But what would the fine people of Atlanta say?"
"Don't be silly, Rhett. Pass the champagne," said Scarlett. They did have a wonderful time together that month. Rhett knew so much about so many things, and he listened to Scarlett and seemed to respect her opinions, when he wasn't arguing with her, that is. But sometimes Scarlett would notice Rhett staring at her with a strange, soft look of desire in his eyes. But then his face would change, and he never told her what he was thinking. Scarlett tried to ignore it, telling herself that Rhett was just a strange person. "I'll never understand him," she thought to herself. During that month in New Orleans, Scarlett found that she did not think about Ashley at all. Ashley was still in Atlanta, of course, working in her lumber factory's office. It was clear that he was not a good businessman. He wasn't nearly as good at making deals with customers and figuring out numbers as she was. But Scarlett was very patient, and she allowed Ashley to make a lot of mistakes. She was sure that he just needed practice. Melanie was extremely grateful for Ashley's job, and she was always telling Scarlett so. Of course, what Melanie didn't know was that it was Scarlett's love for Ashley, more than anything else, which was the reason for her actions. All through the time she had been married to Frank, Scarlett had still thought of Ashley. She told herself that she had never stopped loving him. She felt that she would do anything to see a smile on Ashley's face, because he always seemed so unhappy. Deep down inside herself, Scarlett knew that the reason Ashley was unhappy was because Scarlett had persuaded him to remain in the South, when he had really wanted to go up north. But she always pushed those thoughts away, telling herself that it was better for Ashley to stay in Atlanta. Melanie was happier here, anyway. Now that she was married to Rhett, Scarlett found that she didn't think of Ashley because she and Rhett were always doing such exciting things. Rhett certainly knew how to treat a lady when he wasn't saying such nasty things and laughing at her. Every day in New Orleans, they went shopping or dancing. Scarlett was excited to discuss where they would live in Atlanta and the kind of house they would have. "Rhett, I want our house to be the largest and prettiest in Atlanta. All the women who have talked about me will just die with jealousy. I don't want any old, boring house. I want it to be in the most modern style with the newest furniture. We'll entertain people on the weekends, and I can finally be a great lady, just like my mother was," said Scarlett. Rhett smiled.
"My dear, this house sounds like it will be a disaster, because all the newest styles are terribly ugly. But if that is what you would like, then go ahead and decorate. As for us giving parties, you may find that no one in Atlanta will come to them. We'll see."
"Oh, don't be mean, Rhett. Of course they'll come to my parties. I'm going to have the best parties and be accepted in society before you know it."
"Scarlett, why do you care? I'm afraid it's too late for you to be accepted into society. You have done too many terrible things for people to like you now. But if you would like to try, my dear, I will support you,"
he said. "Good," said Scarlett. When Scarlett and Rhett returned to Atlanta, Scarlett used Rhett's money to build a large house. Everyone in Atlanta agreed that it was a very modern house.
It's the ugliest thing I have ever seen, my dear. You have terrible taste, I am afraid,
said Rhett. Rhett Butler, how can you say such things about this house? It's beautiful. Just look at all the different colors, said Scarlett angrily. Now that Scarlett was married to Rhett, she was going to the factory less and less often. Truthfully, Scarlett had to admit that although she was often angry with Rhett for something he had said, life with him was fun, and Scarlett had not had much fun for many years. Life had been too difficult after the war, and Scarlett was always thinking of money for Tara and how to get more of it. Tara and Ashley had always been in Scarlett's thoughts. Almost every day, Melanie would come to visit Scarlett and bring her little son Beau over to play with Wade and Ella. Scarlett had to admit to herself that Melanie was a much better mother than she was. All the children loved her because she was kind and gentle and told wonderful stories. She listened to Wade's talk about his friends and his school, and told him all about his brave father Charles. Melanie made little Ella dresses and gave her dolls. Scarlett was not at all like Melanie. She was angry with her children when they were loud, and she did not know how to tell stories and play with them the way Melanie did. Scarlett hadn't wanted any of her pregnancies, and so she did not really know her children, especially Wade. Wade loved his mother, but he was rather afraid of her. He preferred to spend time with Mammy, Melanie, and especially Rhett. Wade was very happy when Rhett married his mother. He loved Rhett because Rhett was very kind to him. Scarlett was surprised to learn that Rhett actually liked children. Rhett understood that Wade had never had a father, and his mother did not pay much attention to him. Rhett became like a father to Wade, and Wade loved him. "My children love you and Melanie more than me," Scarlett said one afternoon, watching Melanie play with Wade, Beau, and Ella outside their house. She was a little jealous.
My dear, you aren't a mother to them. Poor Wade is lonely, and Ella barely knows who you are. They spend more time with Mammy than they do you. How can you be surprised?"
said Rhett calmly. "Well, oh, never mind. They wouldn't have food to eat if I hadn't worked so hard," said Scarlett angrily. She didn't want to admit that Rhett was right. Melanie heard Scarlett and Rhett's conversation. "Oh, darling, please don't be upset with me. We know you love Wade and Ella, and they love you. And you've worked so hard for them, hasn't she, Rhett?" Melanie looked anxious because she never liked to see Scarlett upset. "And it is so wonderful for me to play with Ella. I wish I could have a daughter, Scarlett. You're so lucky," Melanie said softly. Years ago, Melanie's doctor had told her that she could never have any more children because she was so small and thin. Having Beau had nearly killed her. If she tried to have another child, she would almost certainly die. But Melanie wanted another child deeply. "Well, Melanie, she certainly is a loud, silly child. You can have her," said Scarlett, but she tried to smile. Because Melanie loved children so much, she was extremely happy to learn a few weeks later that Scarlett was pregnant again. "Scarlett, darling, I'm so happy for you. Would you like a boy or a girl this time?" she said. "I don't care," said Scarlett angrily. "Oh, dear, I don't want to be pregnant again. I hate it. I have too much work to do at the factory with Ashley." In the past few weeks, Scarlett's lumber factory was receiving more customers than it ever had before, and Scarlett had to go and help Ashley with all the accounts. When Scarlett brought up the subject with Rhett, however, he was firm.
My dear, you're not going to work at that silly factory while you're pregnant, and that's final. I won't have my future child's ridiculous mother put him or her in danger from all the dust and dirt of the factory.
But Rhett, business is doing so well, and I have to help Ashley with all the customers. He still hasn't learned some important skills, said Scarlett.
Scarlett, you can argue with me all you want, but you are not going to that factory,
Rhett said.
I don't care what the Honorable Mr. Wilkes does all day. I am sure that you are both dying for each other's company,
he said.
But my child is not going to be around a dirty, disgusting factory with those hopeless people you employ.
Scarlett was furious. Oh, you don't understand Ashley at all. After all these years, you still don't. He's good and honorable. You're jealous, that's it. Do you think that when I'm going over to the factory that Ashley and I are...
No, Scarlett. I know that you haven't done anything like that. The problem is Ashley is too much of a coward. He won't just say to himself, I want Scarlett, and take you away like any other man would. That would be respectable. But Ashley feels too loyal to Melanie for that. But he isn't really loyal to her, because he is always thinking about you.
Oh, you don't know what you're talking about. I won't go to the factory if you're going to be so difficult. You're jealous, that's all, Scarlett said angrily, and ran out of the room. In her bedroom, she stared at herself angrily in the mirror. There was something about Rhett's comments that bothered her, but she could not understand it. Truthfully, Scarlett and Ashley rarely had the chance to speak together alone these days, because Scarlett was always so busy making sure that Archie was keeping the workers busy or finding new customers. Scarlett did not question that she still loved Ashley, but she did not think about it as often as she used to. Why had she ever married a man like Rhett Butler? What had she been thinking? He was so stubborn and rude. And now she was going to have his baby. Scarlett's cheeks turned extremely red at the memory of that one night. A month ago, it had been exciting and strange. Charlie and Frank had never treated her like that. Scarlett sighed and wondered what she and Rhett's child would be like. If I have to have another baby, I hope it's a good-looking child with some character and spirit, not like Wade and Ella, she thought.